Hi, Crystal. So I looked over your lesson plan and I saw the questions that you put in Blackboard for me too. Thank you, because that really helps guide me. And so here's my feedback. I think your instinct was right. This is a lot for eighth graders in a 55-minute class period. It just feels a little rushed. I think what you've essentially done here is create two lesson plans. Let me show you where I think the break is, okay? So I noticed here that you had, you've already talked about 5-paragraph structure in Toolman. You already talked about the definition of argument, claim, evidence, sentence length, okay? So, all right, skimming on through this stuff because it's very well done. All right, here we go. So, I think what you do here is, like I said, create two lesson plans. And I think the first lesson plan is just how to look at, read, and analyze articles. And I think the second lesson plan is how to look at, read, and analyze a speech. And then the homework from that, I think, is consistent with the last part, okay? So you jump in with, about advertising, which is perfect place to start. How do ads influence you, ask you to do something, etc. Okay? Here you have, now for 12 minutes I want you to write an argument about one of the ads that is going to persuade people. I like this. This is really well done, and I want you to stick with it a little bit longer. So you've given the kids 3 sentence stems. So choose an advertisement, choose a sentence stem, write about it. I think you should stay with this and close the loop on this part of the lesson plan before you move on to looking at the speech, okay? So after they have, written about this, that's when you tell them, okay, we're going to talk about some of these persuasive techniques, and after that I'm going to have you go back and look at your ad and see if you still agree with what you said or if you could strengthen your argument, okay? So you have them go through persuasive, why we use them. We've already talked about claim, providing evidence. I think that's really fantastic. Walking through audience, still really good. All right. Taking them from argument back through to claim and thesis statement. And then how do we support a claim? Right here. Hold on. I lost my place. I'm so sorry. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. So all this stuff is good. I'm going to scroll down to where I think you should put your breaks. You teach them ethos, pathos, logos. Okay. Scrolling. You tell them not to worry too much about logos, or ethos, pardon me. Okay. Right here. I would stop right here and I would loop back to what you had them write about their advertisement. Had them look at their advertisement with fresh eyes and now think about ethos, pathos, logos. Maybe you provide them with an evaluative, your 3 evaluative lesson stems again, and have them write a second paragraph, right? What are you seeing now? Is this ad effective because of one of these 3 things? Should it not be allowed because it uses one of these 3 things in a really manipulative way, etc., okay? Close that loop on them on the looking at advertising, thinking about advertising, writing about advertising, and using ethos, pathos, logos. I honestly think that is probably a 55-minute lesson plan right there. By the time you have them, because if you give them 2 10 to 12-minute writing chunks, right, say on the upside, right, that's 24 minutes of writing right there out of a 55-minute class, which when you think about doing the hook and allowing class discussion and then doing this direct instruction, and you're going to take out a minute or 2 at the beginning and end of class because they get rowdy anyways, I think you've got a 55-minute lesson plan right there. So when it gets to here, I think that you can pop this stuff in on lesson plan day number 2 as review. So yesterday we talked about ethos, pathos, and logos, right? And ethos is what is pathos? Oh, it's feeling. And by the way, a really good way to help kids remember that is show them all the words in which the root is used: sympathy, empathy, apathy, because those are all like sympathy, I feel for you. Empathy, I know how you feel. Apathy, I feel nothing. In other words, I don't care, right? So, you go back over pathos, logos, and then you go ethos. Okay, we're going to dive a little deeper into this one and start out there with your review. Why do you listen to a doctor? Do you remember, right? Do you have any questions? And now this is like day number 2 lesson plan. So yesterday we looked at advertisements like that were blatantly set out to persuade you to do something, right? Act a certain way, buy a certain thing, and they use these appeals. Now let's look at how these appeals are used without the visuals or the pictures. We're just going to look at a speech, okay? Right, you read the speech after you read the article, and then the beautiful thing is, right here, I think you could do a little bit of discussion and back and forth with them instead of you doing it all for them. So, all right, we need to look for the author's argument. In other words, why is she writing this? What do you guys think? Have a couple hands, go back and forth. Okay, guide them towards this, right? So let's look for these different kinds of appeals. What's pathos, logos, and ethos. Let's look for different spots that she has used those, okay? And it really allows the kids to interact with this over 2 whole days and, a little bit more discussion, listening to each other, things like that, okay? Okay, and so there's your ethos. And now you can have them move into group practice and continue to look at the same speech, or maybe you have like a different piece for them to look at today. Sometimes even just cutting out an op-ed from a newspaper is good, because op-eds, well, they're opinion-based editorials, op-eds, right? And so they're full of opinions. So even if you had a couple different ones of that printed out and had them practice on their own, I think that would be good. So there's one day looking at something with visuals, one day looking at something with just words, and then you can bring them back and talk about misconceptions. And then you move them into edit your writing to identify one of the persuasive techniques of pathos, logos. From the beginning of class, right? So some of this piece, right, if this piece right here is referring to the advertising, you would have moved that back up. Or maybe it's independent practice, like go home and find an op-ed on the internet or something like that and analyze that on your own, okay? So I think your instincts were really good. I think this lesson plan was just too much, too fast, and you would feel rushed, and so would the kids. Break it clean in half so that you can close the loop on one before you start the other, okay? Other than that, I think you've written 2 really nice lesson plans. Good job.